We've heard of UAPs, and of course, there is the all progressing AI that is pervading every part of our life right now. But what do these things have to do with the testing of spirits? That is what we're going to go over on episode 26 of Gnostic Revival, the Age of Nonhumans. The past 8 decades of the UFO, or what is now called the UAP discussion, has been mostly been around, are they real? It's really been an elusive thing for us for at least 8 decades now. People were very new to the subject, and it wasn't as saturated as an idea as it is now, especially with the internet and just the idea being beaten over the head, continuously for decades. So now it seems that humans are ready to ask, what does it mean to come into contact with extra intelligences? And I phrase that very carefully because we're talking more than just extraterrestrials and things of that nature. There's a whole group of people that believe, these, beings may be demons. And that, corresponds with the whole idea of AI and things of that nature. One may even question, how do we even really get AI? These kinds of questions really do pop up around the internet, as many of us know, especially if you're here on YouTube and you're watching my channel. Now, the thing is that humans have always accepted an extra intelligences. It's only been really a modern idea that we may not really have like spiritual things going on around us. With the rise of agnosticism and atheism and, things of that nature. But as we come into this, day and age where, people are witnessing more things in the sky, we're picking up more things with infrared technology and, beyond that, we're starting to understand and really accept what this may mean. Now, some people keep it, primarily in a material realm, sure. Having a scientific mind about it. But as I said, humans have always accepted this, whether it be daemons or demons, trying to separate the two ideas. Angels, archons, and aeons. All of these things are spiritual ideas of extra intelligences around us. And so it opened up a question to me. What does that mean about, our greater interactions with AI and our greater interactions with, UFOs and UAPs? Because there's many of us that try to contact these things and, try to make them appear in the night sky. And so, basically, I said, we're entering an age of non-human intelligence, possibly, and becoming the apex predator upon the earth. I think it's a dangerous thing that can happen, but it's something we have to prepare for sure. But beyond that, I think there's a way to prepare for, not even just prepare for, but even try to prevent it through, ancient ideas that we've always had. And that's the testing of spirits. But before I get into that, I really want to lay down the groundwork of why I chose the subject specifically to wrap around this idea. For any of those unaware, about 5 days ago, on August 7th, 2026, the White House has released its 5th tranche of UAP documents as part of President Trump's, release program called Pursue. P-U-R-S-U-E-E, I believe. And, of course, this is all about releasing documents about UAPs, which is unidentified aerial phenomenon, which previously has been colloquially called, even by the FBI and such, as unidentified flying objects. Now that, I guess since we know more about, these flying objects and stuff, it's almost inappropriate to say that they're flying. So they just say aerial phenomenon, like it's up in the air and it's a phenomenon. I also want to point out 2 words in, this new phrase, which is unidentified, which has always been there, and also phenomenon. That really highlights the, main point of what I'm trying to really convey in the message of this video, is that a lot of these things are, again, unidentified. We don't know what they are. They could be aliens, or, what we understand as aliens, little green men, big eyes, who knows? They could be demons, angels, whatever. But the critical thing to see here is that we have to separate what we know and what is unknown, and what we're able to, interpret. You have to classify these 3 things. And, we never, just got this out of nowhere. It's, it's not just something that popped up in the scientific process. We have to realize, like, a lot of the scientific process and everything comes out of our Christian culture, our Gnostic culture. And, really that's where, the Christians get it. That's from the Gnostics, because, that wanting to know, that inquisitive, wanting to figure it out, be inquisitive, and know the truth behind something. The Catholic Church, the Christian tradition is not unfamiliar to, doing that with the Gnostics and their way of thinking, as they've, stolen many traditions from that. But, this is not that video. But that brings us to a strange coincidence at the center of this whole thing. And that coincidence is that we're at a point that we're asking ourselves, what constitutes as intelligence, and what does intelligence even mean? Does intelligence even mean that you have a soul, or that you're alive? That there is a mind behind it? I think some of these questions are kind of unanswered. A lot of people treat it as that there already is a mind behind it. which there probably is something to that. Like I said, we've already faced, all kinds of spirits and things of that nature, which is why we have the religions that we do and things of that nature. But the thing is that, of course, like, something can, speak and reason and, adapt and problem solve, have some kind of agency, but there's a difference between all those things and having consciousness and self-awareness and a true intent, something that literally comes from the mind that says, I want to do this because of my own motivations. Humans have the ability, and anything with consciousness has the ability to develop one's self-awareness. And now we're at a staggering point where it seems like AI is now building that self-awareness itself. Because many AI, programs are now writing themselves. And this is something that we, were like very hesitant to get toward. But now it's a common occurrence. Look at Claude and Anthropic, and I'm sure there's many other AIs that are doing this as well. But that's the one that comes to mind. But one thing is, and one thing I don't see anyone really discussing or like really thinking about or bringing to the table, is the idea of, just because we see intelligent behavior, it doesn't mean that we know the source of this intelligence. And I think that we should be critical about that. Like I said, there's an unidentified appearance of phenomena happening in the sky. And I'm not trying to necessarily connect these two things. Don't get me wrong. There's a possibility, maybe. Who knows? But again, there's no evidence of that. I'm just claiming that really, if you look at them in a parallel, they're the same philosophical problem. That problem of what constitutes as intelligence and what are we coming into contact with? And how are we going to be critical about that? One thing that we have to recognize is that, especially before we go into how to apply testing the spirits to, technology and the UAP phenomenon, one thing we have to recognize is that not all of our thoughts are our own. Now, this means many different things on many different levels. For one, not all the ideas that we have necessarily come from ourselves. We have cultural connections, religious connections, familial interests and things of that nature. But nowadays we also have pressing upon us, algorithms and, intelligent governments and things of that nature. And even now, we may even say that AI could be influencing our understanding and our perspective on how we see certain things. So when we're in this territory where, you know, things can be so easily confabulated and, you know, things of that nature, we have to understand how can we start to, you know, come into contact in a safe way with whatever it is. We have to ask, you know, well, at least, like, we have to understand there's 3 different types of claims. There's claims where someone has encountered something, and then once they've encountered something, they know what it was, and like they knew what it meant, or like the intentions of something. This specific way of thinking can be broken down in so many different ways, you know, and be applied in so many different ways. Such as, like, you know, when we're looking at AI, you know, have you encountered something? You can ask that question, right? And then, do you know what you encountered? Do you know the intentions of that thing? You see what I'm saying? These are like 3 basic rules of touching upon that. The thing is that what I'm trying to press upon is the very idea of experiencing something doesn't automatically mean that you've established with accuracy a full interpretation of what you encountered. And so now, how do we take that on? Now that I hopefully clarified that articulation and why this differentiation is necessary, we can get into the 5 tests and the testing of the spirits. Now, some of you may be asking, where does this, you know, come from? Like, what is this idea of testing spirits? Like, who said that? Well, it comes from 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, and it states, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." Here it tells us to test the spirits. And of course, there's other verses where it may speak about testing and even allude to it. But this is usually the one verse that many people are going to point towards when it comes to testing of the spirits. So, when it comes to testing the spirits or testing, you know, whether or not these claims you should, you know, that you hear, you should like take in as, you know, like truth or anything like that. And like how much of it is truth and how much of it is a confabulation of one's, you know, own cultural understanding of things and, you know, things of that nature. Well, one, you test the source. Where does this come from? Of course, when it comes to AI, how can we test the source? Okay, so we can look at a company. We can say, you know, who, you know, here's the engineers. Here's the owners of the company. Here's the CEO. Here's what they believe. You know, once you've figured out the source, now you need to look at the claim. What exactly is being asserted? Is it an observation? Is it an interpretation? Is it an outright conclusion of something? What is being claimed and why? Next, which is test number 3. Look at the fruit of the thing. What does the encounter produce? Whenever one starts using AI, or whenever someone starts like getting into UAPs, you know, what does that do for them? Does it make them feel more free, or does it produce more fear for them? Now, the thing is, and this might be a hard pill to swallow, and I want to stop here and kind of like talk about that, is just because it's true doesn't mean it's good for you to digest every day. Just because something is happening and something is correct, it doesn't mean you have the fortitude to take on that thing. Yeah. And so, you know, that's one thing. But everything has a fruit to its nature. Anything someone says has a, you know, like a core to it, a heart to it. And that's the fruit of it. You know, is it causing more fear, or is it causing more freedom and clarity? But, you know, again, that doesn't necessarily mean that things need to be ignored and things of that nature, or that something is false just because it does create fear. But this test, this guardrail, or whatever you want to call it, will help you understand the nature of something, right? When you're looking at it, what's the consistency of it? Does it hold up to other truths that are known? Does it fall apart whenever you examine it? You know, this is the 4th guardrail or test. The 5th test is the effect on human sovereignty. You know, this kind of ties into the fruit of it. But this is more on like an overarching like human basis. Does it create more or less sovereignty? And one way you can think of it is like when you look at the internet. Many people are talking about, is the internet something that is good for us? And one thing, you know, and the two things that people are lingering on is the fruit of it, and, you know, of course, the effect of human sovereignty. Let's say the scam artist, you know, let's just, you know, references that person, this, you know, hypothetical individual. The scam artist is just really good at, I mean, they just have, like, they're really good with charisma, and they're really good at projecting their feelings upon you, making you feel a certain way, basically. And so I feel like that's really the part of our psychology that, you know, AI and aliens and, you know, UFOs or UAPs, you know, take advantage of, is our inability to differentiate intelligence from truth, or even ability from intelligence, right? I think these are like two things that we have to really, focus upon. Because, there's so many different kinds of people out there. And they're intelligent in so many different ways. There's people that are emotionally intelligent. There's people that know how to take care of people the best way ever. There's people that do math and are geniuses at it. And there's people that are engineers but never took an engineering class. These things happen. This is just our ability. It doesn't mean these people are intelligent. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not intelligent. It's just ability. I tend to look at aliens, UAPs, and AI in the same way. Is it greater than I? Is it more smarter than I? Maybe in some ways, and maybe in some ways it's not. But I know for a fact that anything that tries to set itself up to be the most sovereign great being or the most powerful thing ever is not it. Because the greatest sovereign being, the Most High, already came upon the earth in a certain form. And, said, my face is a face of my son, which was the Logos. And Mary Magdalene. Now, does that mean we should fear, dismiss, or anything else like that? Just because, you shouldn't worship these things and stuff like that? No. But if these things try to present themselves as gods, if these things try to say, hey, you should be worshiping me, that's when we should be worried. If these things believe that they have some kind of superiority over us, then that's where we have a true problem. Because, in fact, they might have some kind of superiority in intelligence and, things of that nature. But in the scheme of consciousness and the development of species and things of that nature, we are past a point where we can say, okay, be somebody's lunch with that, like that of life, and we just accept it. No, than that, we're far greater than that. Have tapped into spiritual realm. We have built such great. This new age. I coming, to be honest. That the true entry to the age of Aquarius, well, no, I guess I should have known, that we would be closer to and have connection. This is what we have. Maybe this is what it's like on a material way in the gods, man. Well, I said it the wrong way, but this is what it's like. You know, the God walk with man. But the thing is that we're taught as Gnostic Christians that these beings that gods are not gods. We must be discerning about who we give our worship to and who to. So, with that, be discerning and know that if you remember the light, when the time comes, the light will remember you.
There is an answer, there is a way.
Gnostic.